Hello everyone, today I will talk about ConfInLog, an automatic tool to infer configuration constraints from software logs. As we all know, misconfigurations have caused server failures frequently in global enterprises, such as Facebook, Google. One major cause is the ever-increasing complexity of software configuration. To avoid misconfiguration beforehand, document is the main source for users to comprehend configuration constraints. However, as mentioned by Yin and Rapkin, the document is often incomplete and outdated. In order to help users to understand the configuration constraints, specs and CDEP are focusing on inferring constraints from source code. This process, however, may be limited in practice. On one hand, the pointer usage may bring great barriers in static program analysis, especially for large-scale software, limiting the analysis scope and accuracy. On the other hand, the quality of predefined code patterns that describes configuration constraints are highly dependent on personal experience. In the meantime, we found that the log record, which we refer to as the log text outputs at runtime, contains the constraint of configuration. As the motivating example shows, the constraint of option virtual document root is clearly defined in the string of return statement, but it is difficult to infer by traditional static analysis method since it doesn't match any predefined code patterns. To figure out the prevalence of configuration constraints in logs, we carried out an empirical study on 4 popular open source software. We generate configuration errors to inject into the software and run official test cases. Next, we analyze the log records to figure out whether there is any configuration constraint. The data is shown in table. We found that 57% of configuration options have constraint descriptions in the log record. Based on the data, we saw that we could infer configuration constraints from logs. However, it is challenging to trigger all the log record in practice. Thus, we took a further look at the logs in source code. We clarify 2 different concepts here. Log statement refers to the program statements that perform logging behaviors, and log message refers to the string constants that will be printed by log statements. Considering the difficulty in recognizing and analyzing log statements, we mainly focusing on log messages in our research. To infer constraints from log message, we need to identify whether a log message is related to specific configuration option. In our study, we found that 22.4% of log messages directly contain configuration names inside, and 29.4% of configuration-related log messages fall into 2 code patterns. The log message is influenced by variables or functions related to this configuration option. In total, we could identify 51.8% of configuration-related log messages by directly match option names in log messages or by finding relevant variables or functions. Based on the findings, we design and implement ConfInLog, a tool to infer configuration constraints from software logs. ConfInLog takes source code and configuration options as input and output a list of configuration constraints. There are 2 main steps, log message selection and constraints inferring. In the log message selection step, ConfInLog collects the log messages and selects configuration-related ones. Briefly speaking, ConfInLog first checks whether there is any configuration name inside the log message. If not, ConfInLog apply a backward slicing and try to match variables and functions related to configuration options in the slice. Then, ConfInLog infers the constraints. Considering that the log messages are written in natural language, we manually collect descriptions of configuration constraints from documents of 11 different software systems, then generate the part-of-speech patterns to describe the style of constraints. When inferring constraints, giving a log message related to configuration, ConfInLog generates the corresponding part-of-speech text sequence and try to match with any patterns. If there is a match, ConfInLog regards the log message as a constraint description. To evaluate ConfInLog, we mainly answer two research questions: the effectiveness of ConfInLog on inferring configuration constraints, and how ConfInLog compared with the state-of-the-art methods. For research question 1, ConfInLog could infer 22 to 164 configuration constraints from log messages, with an average precision at 72.1%. Besides, based on the inferred constraints, we submitted 67 patches to enhance the document. 29 patches have been confirmed by the developers, among which 10 patches have been accepted. We also compare ConfInLog with the state-of-the-art method, specs, and the dynamic method. The data shown in the bar graph proves the effectiveness of ConfInLog. In total, ConfInLog could infer 59% to 61% of constraints of that specs and the dynamic method could not infer. And also, there are 40.3% of constraints that both specs and dynamic method could not infer. The result shows that ConfInLog could be an effective complement to previous work. To sum up, we found that log messages could be used to infer configuration constraints. We design and implement ConfInLog, a static tool to infer configuration constraints from log messages, and the experiment results prove its effectiveness. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is session Inferring Code Evolution, and I'm Shinpei Hayashi from Tokyo Institute of Technology, Japan, who is chairing the session. So, any question from the audience for this talk by Shrin of ConfInLog, leveraging software logs to infer configuration constraints? If you have any questions, please post it to the ICPC main room chat. Okay, I have one question to Shrin. So,
Okay.
have you conducted any qualitative evaluation for the false positives, or did you see some real falses and investigate the reasons?
Yes, we have analyzed the false positives and the false negatives in our paper. In brief, the false positives mainly introduced by the incorrect selection of configuration-related logs, and the mismatch of part of speech patterns in the log message. For example, the log message symbolic link is not allowed to link target logs accessible. I pasted in the chat room this. She's mismatched with the configuration accept pass info. Oh, sorry. The chat page is stuck. Okay. But she's matched with the wrong configuration variable. So this configuration is mismatched with the log message, and we matched it wrong. So that's mainly the false positives, and the false negatives may come from the description of constraints that describing the error status of a configuration. For instance, the log message configuration is mismatch replace operator. But this option is indicate that there should be I don't know how to describe, but this log message is not described by our part of speech pattern, so we missed that. As for the patches that are not accepted by the developers, they may be concerned that our patches may complicate their document. They want to keep their document simple and clean, so they didn't accept our patches.
Thank you.